Thanks to you, Michela. So I'll start share my screen. Good afternoon, everybody. This will be a little bit of a crash course, actually, since of course in once 3 hours and now 2 hours and 3/4, I can give you just a little bit of an introduction to what is in general visual thinking, as the title of my workshop says, how important it is, how useful is to apply visualization and visual thinking to communicate science. And of course, as Michela said, I will give you a brief introduction of how I got there. And at a certain point, as you were told by the organizers, I will ask you to use your own visualization skills actively and to start visualize your own ideas and the information that you have available with pen and paper. So be ready to get a little bit out of your comfort zone. I will explain you later what I mean. First, as I said, I will give you a little bit of an introduction to my career and life path. Basically, I started as a guy who was in love with art and visualization and graphic and design in general, but someone who was also really interested in biology, especially evolution. The latter passion at the beginning won as a viable career path, and I got a Bachelor of Science in biology at the University of Parma, and after Master of Science in molecular biology at the University of Padua. For the Master of Science, I did also an internship in Würzburg in Germany for my thesis work, where I studied sex determination in a small aquarium fish called Medaka. After this experience, up to that, so far, I was really focused and projected to keep on with the university and with my academic career. But at a certain point, I made a general check of what a career path in the academia meant. And I thought that that was not for me at the moment. I felt a little bit confused and lost because since then I was really focused and one way projected in a career as a researcher in academia, basically. So I basically I found myself in a situation where I had to explore different paths and different ways than the one that I previously programmed for myself. Luckily, since I was with my, I was looking really carefully and keenly around, a dear friend of mine, who was in Padua herself too, presented me with this way. She was doing workshops for companies and people in the industry. One of them was about this cool way of taking notes, which is not the common written, handwritten, or even worse, typed note on a computer, which are sketch notes. They are. I will soon explain you what they are. It's basically a way to visualize information while you're taking notes and schematize information. Once I got in touch with this methodology, I got this idea And I found myself in a situation where I could merge these two interests of mine, the visualization and schematization and synthetic approach to information, with science, with thinking about science, with communicating science. And I found myself so interested that I started to practice a lot in different contexts. And at the same time, I've also moved to Milan to in a more active in a more active field where to practice this activity, which at the moment became, after all of that much practice, became my full-time job. And I also, as Michela said, last year, 2 years ago actually, attended the Psycho Master in Trento to focus and to train more my science communication part of my experience. So basically, what I do today, my job consists in doing sketch notes, which are visual notes, small visual notes on paper or digitally using a tablet, which I use for personal reflection or study to prepare and arrange my thinking, my presentations, or my elaboration about some scientific subject, so that I can communicate that better to a specific audience. I do graphic recording, which is basically the same principle. It's in fact, in this case, it's made for a live audience. It's the practice of visually schematizing a flow of ideas expressed by a speaker or by a group of people, so that the people can see the live drawing of this flow of ideas or of this story. So to create some sort of a live visual storytelling of what has been said, and of the relationships between the key concepts that the speaker is delivering. I also create animated scribing. I think many of you have seen something like that. It's the kind of videos where there is a voiceover and a hand drawing. I do a lot of this lately. These are video recording of a live drawing or an animation to create communication videos, and in this case, a lot of videos created to communicate research projects or to deliver scientific concepts in an engaging way to a wider public. And finally, I also use this visual thinking technique, this visualization technique, to create resources for visual science communication, to create, for example, graphics for social media dissemination and the simple and easy diffusion of scientific concepts and methods to the different public. Why I do this? Basically, why am I so interested to this? I will give you a brief introduction before we move on about the importance of visual communication, especially for science. The first thing that we need to consider is that, especially nowadays, we are overwhelmed by information and data. Just as a reminder, as a few data that can illustrate the situation better, we nowadays read 5 times as much of information every day as in 1986. During our leisure times, we process the equivalent of 34 gigabytes of information, which is the equivalent, or more or less, 100,000 words per day. And even more interestingly, on the average web page, user read just 20% of what there is written there. So this creates the need for information and context to be catch and glance to catch with the glance in its essence, the need to make sense of what we are viewing in few seconds in order to avoid cognitive overload for our brain. That is why, especially nowadays, images are the visual language, images and picture, are so diffused as a way to communicate, because they help us fight this information overload. They can direct our attention to the relevant elements of a piece of information, avoiding distraction or confusion. They are engaging and much more reassuring than a wall of text to be analyzed in search of the content we need. They are quick to process and rely on features that our eyes can decode and analyze in an instant, in several tens of times faster than we do with words, avoiding, again, to waste cognitive energies. This clarity also make images easy to link to prior knowledge, which supports the learning of new information. And also the spatial organization of visual material allows to fix the information encoded visually in our memory much more than words. There is something called the picture superiority effect. More or less the 75% of material presented visually is remembered better than the material presented in words. Science, in this sense, has always benefited from the use of visualization. We can think throughout centuries of many examples. You can think of the documenting of what the natural phenomena says or show when tested. For example, for the Galileo drawings of his observation of the moon, or the beautiful Ernst Haeckel canvas where he draws these beautiful pictures of marine organisms. They are also used actually not just to represent visualization, to visualize real object outside in the world and phenomena, but also to reason about those data and observation, sometimes in a way that changed our view of the world forever. We can think of the Faraday's ring, to which he sketched in his notebook to think about electromagnetism. We can think of the Darwin's tree of life, the famous I think doodle, which is much more powerful than it may seem from this small drawing. And also, of course, the double helix. This sketch here is directly from Crick's hand. And also, which is the part that interests, in this case, us most, science has benefited from the use of visualization also to communicate science to other scientists and to laymen or laywomen. These, for example, are some of the earliest example of infographics and data visualization. They are from the 19th century. And they were made exactly to communicate scientific results and observation in an easier way for people who were not in the same field of the scientist or of the observer. Specifically, what kind of benefits images offer to science? Images for science, they make complexity of phenomena clearer and easier to grasp. They can make the abstract visible and the concrete they can make the abstract concrete and the invisible visible. For example, as the DNA molecule that otherwise, before the the model was a really good reference for what this molecule could look like, much more than an X-ray image. The images are also essential for scientific reasoning and for modeling natural phenomena, as we saw before with Darwin or the DNA molecule itself. And finally, of course, images are a powerful means to communicate and share scientific knowledge. But there is a problem. The problem is called visual literacy. In contrast to the expert in visual communication, such as graphic designer, most of the time scientists are not generally trained in visual literacy. What is visual literacy, basically? Literacy can be described as the skill, the ability to identify, understand, interpret, create, communicate, and compute, more generally speaking, use some sort of language. With written language, we are quite okay with that. We are trained since we are young to do that, and increasingly to an increasingly better level. With visual language, we are quite okay with identifying, understand, and interpret visual resources and visual objects. Not that much, actually, to be honest, but we are still quite okay. We have a problem with the last part of our literacy list of activity. We have a problem with create, communicate, and compute with images. Why is that so? Because, first of all, the first reason that we can identify with that is that drawing and sketching and doodling, as soon as you become like 10 or 12 or 14 years old, is starting to get discarded as a kid activity, which is completely wrong, which is really is like losing 0.5% of your brain. The ability to use the visual language to give a shape to your thoughts, to your train of reasoning, and to your ideas, either to help yourself to think about them and also to communicate those thoughts to other people, is of pivotal importance. That's where I come in, basically. I exactly use this kind of visualization. I'm not an illustrator. I'm not a graphic designer, definitely. For what I do, sometimes I can be defined as artist. It's a little bit flattering to me, but I don't even consider myself so. What I do is basically, most of the time, I move at a much more basic level. I use sketching, doodling, simple drawing, visual mappings to visually schematize, synthesize, and map ideas, processes, and stories. Most of the time, as you may see from the picture, I do it live. And that's exactly the point of using visual thinking. It's not about art. It's not about practicing your artistic talent. It's about knowing to give how to give a shape to your ideas, to learn how to reason with pen and paper using images. Again, I repeat, we are not, and we will not, as you see in a few minutes, we will not be doing art. Why visual thinking? How does visual thinking work, and why it is useful to know how our visual perception and our visual understanding of the world works for creating effective and efficient science communication made visual. We need to go a little bit to the basis, to the foundation to understand this. What is visual thinking, basically? There are many definitions, actually. The one that I prefer and that can be useful for our understanding of what I mean and what I'm trying to deliver is the one that put together three activities: seeing, imagining, and drawing. By seeing, you basically find a visual form for what you have in front of you, be it objects of information. You need to basically train the way you look at things, to what you have in front of you, where it is in relation to other things, in what amount there is that stuff, how it is related to the rest of the world, and why. Imaging is basically using your mind's eye, your imagination, to process those images, the ones that you have in front of your eyes that you perceive, or the ones that you have stored in your memory and in your knowledge, to summon and to foresee future scenarios, to reconstruct what can happen next, what is the frame through which you look at things, what is the perspective, what can you picture, what can you see of an image in terms of patterns, in terms of selecting what is important and what you need to ignore for that specific purpose of what you are looking. And finally, of course, drawing, which is basically giving a shape to the images produced by your mind or the one you perceive with your eyes. Keep in mind that these three activities are interlinked. They are linked together. Your perception abilities influences your drawing abilities. Your imagination influences your drawing abilities. So the three of them together are linked and influence each other. So you can train your ability to look and perceive the world, and you will benefit your ability to draw. You can train your imagination, you will benefit your ability to see and drawing. You can train your drawing abilities, you will be able to train your thinking and imagining abilities. Okay? Why it is so? Why it works in this way? Basically, the basic thing that we have to think about is that our brain interprets the world around us mostly with vision. Every second, we are bombarded with millions and millions of photons that enter through our eyes and get into our cerebral cortex to be decoded as information. The estimates says that as humans use up to the 30% of our cerebral cortex with activities linked directly or indirectly to vision. So it is the main sense through which we perceive the world. What does it mean? It means that these huge amounts of information that comes to us, the brain needs to filter. Even if we perceive, even if we have a lot of incoming information through our eyes at a given time, the visual processing system does its better to reduce this information as much as it could and retain only the feature that he needs. Basically, what our brain does is selecting the visual information useful only for what is called a visual task. We at any time see what our brain requires to accomplish a certain task. We see what we need to see. If we need to find a path through a crowd, we see the openings and the exit doors. If we are trying to find a friend, we see the faces. We do not spot our attention to much else. We can think of this process of seeing as the execution of continuous visual task in the environment. We always spot the information we need. This means that when you are creating an information visualization or a visual communication design, you have to guide the eyes of the viewer so that he reaches the information he needs easily to get the information that he needs to accomplish that visual task. He has a question that your visual communication needs to answer. You need to build something that easily guides his eyes or her eyes to the information that he needs for his or her purpose. For example, what's the title of the research? What are the results? What is more relevant and what is less for that research? What kind of process did the research follow? Depending on what kind of information you want to highlight, you need to make easy to spot these kind of information. How do you do that? You use what are called the preattentive feature. What are the preattentive features? Our brain is able to interpret this feature of what he perceives through the eyes in less than 200 milliseconds. Basically, it's not exactly so, but basically... Sorry? I thought someone wanted to intervene. Basically, it's an activity that our brain does well before we put our attention to it. What are these features? Position. Our brain easily spot and gives meaning to where is what we see and where it is in relation to a coordinate system. Length, how far what we see is extended along one dimension. Size, how big is in 2 or 3 dimensions, since we are three-dimensional being. Orientation or angle, that is respect to a coordinate system, how much something is inclined. The curvature, how much something is more curved or curved or more or less curved. The shape, we immediately identify when something is square, round, triangular, etc. The color, of course, we distinguish very quickly if something is yellow, green, red, black, etc. But also if something has different shades of the same color, such as a lighter or a darker green, for example. The texture, if something is dotted or with parallel lines or with a grid or with concentric circles, or even, again, if it has a more or less higher density of the same texture, for example, more or less dense dots. Connection, when something is visually connected to something else, of course, and boxing and closure, when you close some shape or some information in another line. The key point here is this. In general, the more information you can encode in your visual design and your visual communication using this feature, the more explicit the information that you want to communicate will be for the viewer. The proper use of this feature, length, size, color, and all the others, to communicate information and data visually, will allow the viewer to easily and efficiently process as much information as possible with respect to the visual task of looking for that specific kind of information he is looking for to accomplish in order to answer the question he is trying to answer by looking at your design, at your visual piece of communication. With this feature, you can represent basically three kinds of different information. You can represent categorical information, different kind of categories, like, for example, male patient, female patient, younger patient, older patient, or many different kind of different categories. Order, like different steps of increasing quantities of or sequences of information in a time, in terms of time or steps of process. And of course, quantitative information, how much or how many there is of something else. If translated, we translate this into useful and practical examples. You can use, for example, position to define categorical information. If you put 3 chunks of text in 3 different positions, our eyes immediately perceive those 3 chunks of text separated as pertaining to 3 different categories of information. You can use position also to represent order, as you do with bullet points and with lists, since there is an order from top to bottom that your brain interprets immediately as a list of information that you have to read in order. And of course, with timelines, we usually see left to right the information explained in a sequential order when you create a timeline. And of course, position can also represent quantity. For example, if you, in some sort of a scatter plot, you can use the position with respect to a coordinate axis to represent quantitative information. Another example is shape. Different shape, for example, different shape used for bullet points, we will see that later, can be used to encode different categories. We can use a round shape, for example, or a specific symbol or illustrated icon to spot, to identify a specific category, and another one to identify another. And also, you can use color to do the same, to represent different categories. You can assign, for example, a certain color to a specific group of patients, or another to another one, so that your eyes can easily, in your visual design, spot what groups, what patient belongs to what group. You can use length and size for quantity easily, and you know much easily from bar charts or pie charts to use length and size to represent quantitative information, of course. A little bit less effective to this purpose is to use angle, and that's why pie charts are not so loved, and many people who deal with data visualization would discard you from use them, because our eyes perceive quantitative data much better in position or length or size than they do with the angle. So it's a little bit less effective. What can we use apart from order to represent, apart from, sorry, position to represent order data, we can also use color. Our eyes perceive different shades of the same color as a progression. Be careful, because in this case, in some way, your eye also perceive this as maybe decreasing or increasing quantity or increasing intensity. So this information may be perceived as quantity too. So be careful to use this kind of pre-attentive feature to represent order. It's still a possibility, but most of the time, as you see here in summary, the most powerful feature, pre-attentive feature to represent categorical data, order or sequence data, and quantitative data is definitely position. But of course, you can use also the other, as I showed you here, specifically these others. We can also see the visual perception from another perspective, which is the path that our electric signals do from our brain, from our eyes, sorry, to our brain, and how they are decoded throughout the way. How does it happen? First of all, the retina in our eyes, of course, translates light stimuli into electrical impulses, which travel along the optical nerve and reach the brain. At this point, 10% of these signals end up reaching this area here, which is called the superior colliculus, is located on top, atop of the brainstem, and then they move to the parietal lobe of the brain. This is called the old pathway, which is called so because it's really evolutionary old. It let us interpret our coordinates, our space coordinates, orientation, and position in relation to other things, much before we are conscious of that. There are experiments of people who suffer some blind or some kind of visual impairment, who were blind, but were still able to understand their position with their eyes and the position of objects with respect to them. Why? Because this part of the signals that we are not even conscious are still decoded by our brain, even if the conscious part of our vision in the cerebral cortex doesn't happen. That's why position is so important when you are trying to decode some sort of information visually. What is the first thing that you do, for example, when you enter in a pub or in a bar and you want to you are there to meet your friends? What the first thing you do? Basically, you perceive which way is up. Where are the edges of the room? How big is the room? How deep is the room? Well before you are conscious of that, your brain decodes these stimuli much, much faster. The other 90% of the signal pass through the new pathway along what is called the lateral geniculate nucleus, and then he goes to the visual cortex at the back of our brain, where the information coming through to the retina go through a first categorization. Here the brain encodes depths, movement, colors, edges. He gives the conscious image of what we are looking at. After this first elaboration, the signals get splitted again. Of course, keep in mind, this is a simplification. This is a simplified model, but there are many, quite a big bunch of research since a lot of time, since many years ago, that shows us things are more or less in this way. From the visual cortex, the signals are again divided, and a part of these signals go to the temporal lobes, which is what is called the what pathway. Here we begin to recognize and identify objects within our own environment. We put together the information about edges, color, depth, together to perceive the actual object. The other part of the signal goes instead again to the temporal lobe, to the parietal lobe, sorry, in what is called the how pathway. Here we decode more elaborated information about the position and relation, the spatial relation of the object in relation to us, and how can we how do we relate with this object? What all this means in terms of information visualization. We can follow this route basically in terms of importance of what we have to think when you're visualizing information. First of all, we think of the spatial feature of our information. The canvas, how big it is, how the information is laid out on our canvas, what is the size that we need to have, that we need to give to our visualization, how we spatially organize data and information on our visualization. Second, we think of about how to visualize and represent objects and data of your research or of the scientific content that you want to represent and communicate. And here you think and you select what are the key messages and how to convey them, either visually or textually. We'll see that later. Third, you define the fine structure, the process, the time relationship within the research, how they are mapped on your space, how are the relevant piece of the information related. And finally, you elaborate all this information globally to create a coherent information visualization design, which is something that you need to have if you want to communicate your content properly. This translates basically into what we are going to delve now. The study of the layout, the study of the content, again, either expressed with text or expressed with images, and the hierarchy and the structure of your content, how you use arrows and boxes to create diagrams, how you use bullet points, how you give your content spatial relationships using visual elements. Let's start, as I said, with the layout. And first of all,
sorry, Jacopo, can I interrupt with a question?
Yeah, of course.
Mind? While you were talking, I was thinking, of the things we have heard so far, and that basically one has to also to identify the audiences and so when communicating. And on one hand, of course, we are thinking of an information that should be for all people in general, everybody. On the other hand, there is also an issue of inclusiveness, and there are neurally diverse people also, and and I was wondering. So you are giving us some general truth in some way. Our brain works like that, and of course we are all diverse, and so maybe not everybody works exactly like that. And I was thinking, for example, are there influences of cultural barriers? Like, for example, when you say left to right is the normal order, but like Japanese and Hebrew writing, they write from right to left, for example. And age age, for example, I know very well because I observe my kids. They have a different level of attention. So they take care of different things that we take care of. For example, in the example of the environment where you look for the exit, I suspect they would look for different things than me.
Of course, definitely.
And gender, and I'm thinking of evolutionary differences where somehow different sexes have evolved the different attitudes to, I don't know, the hunting rather than picking vegetables, whatever.
I will tell you a great example about this, color.
And so exactly, the other point is color, and I was thinking, what about color blindness? Is there, is there colors one should avoid, even if they were expressing better an emotion or something? Sorry, I put a lot of stuff here, but this was getting in my brain.
No, you're right. Of course, since I'm giving you just a brief introduction about everything, visual communication and visual expression would take hours and hours to delve deep into. Definitely, visualization need is many times is more universal than words, but sometimes it's really culturally dependent. Of course, one of the examples, as you said, is the fact that we as Western people tend to read from left to right, and that's our natural, not natural, but cultural way of perceiving progression. For other people, it may be the other way around. Color is another example. Some colors can be actually color. I think it's the most paramount example of this, because it's really, really culturally influenced, and of course also biologically, as you said. Every time, but we see that later, you create your visual design and your visual communication, first of all, you need to focus on the audience, who you are talking to, and why they would, for what purpose you are talking to, and what you want them to know or do or think, and how this relates to your visual design. What is the better way to visualize your information, what to put in there or what not to put in there, because visualization in this case is also synthesis. Of course, another thing that I can say is many colleagues of mine stress the fact that we all think in images, which is statistically true, but not for everyone. There is a certain percentage of people, not minus one, I think it's around almost 10% of the population, who is suffer from aphantasia. They are not able to summon visual images in their mind. How do you deal with these people when you visualize? So it's always a matter of focusing on the target audience and who you are talking to. The same visualization, of course, never works for everybody. We will see that later. Thank you, Michaela, for this, for the possibility.
Thank you for the answer.
Yeah. And first of all, as I was saying, the first thing that we need to keep in mind is the layout and the size of our visualization. Why we are visualizing? We are creating an academic poster. We are creating a graphical abstract that need to go printed on a journal. We are creating a slide presentation. We are creating an image for a post on Instagram or social media. The first thing that your brains and your eyes need to keep in mind is how big and what is the ratio of the canvas of the territory in which on which you are going to map your information. It's the first essential part. How do you use this territory to make information visible for your brain and immediately understandable? One of the first things that you can do is, for example, using the corners of your layout or the edges or the center of your layout. Why? Because, as I said, unconsciously, your brain, the first thing you do when it is in front of a piece of visualization, as it does when you are exploring a physical environment, is looking for the edges. How big is this piece of visualization I have in front of me? How wide? Where are the corners? Where are the edges? Where is the central? The first thing that our eyes does, again, totally unconsciously, is perceiving the size and the edges of our canvas. That's why, if you think for a moment, the important information when you see flyers or like any sort of advertising visual, it's put in the corner, either most of the time on the topmost left corner or in the bottom right corner. For example, you put the contact information on the bottom right corner so that your eyes can spot that immediately. Me, myself, for example, as I do my sketch notes, my live sketching or my live mapping of concepts, most of the time I put a small portrait of the speaker either in the corner, in the top left corner, or near the left edge of the of my sketch, of my visualization. Since for our culture, most of the time, it's the first part that we are going to look at. Of course, as Michela rightly underlined, you modify this kind of orientation left to right, depending on the culture you are talking to. And of course, you can start also from the center of your visualization. Another strategy is also to use your layout as symmetry. Symmetry is great for side-to-side comparison, like pros and cons, or category A to category versus category B. Or you can also build 2x2 grid, which are used in a lot of different contexts to, for example, confront different observation around two different systems of coordinates, and also to use the 4 quadrants in different ways. The symmetrical way of using your layout gives your eyes a sense of balance, a sense of giving equal weight to both the part of your design. On the contrary, asymmetry, like if you put information more in a more unbalanced way on the space, create a more dynamic composition that gives your brain the impression of movements. Basically, what I'm trying to tell you is that space and the use of space is not neutral, even to children. The way that you choose to use your the visualization, to use the space to your visualization, it communicates itself. Of course, again, it depends on the type of content and of key information that you want to communicate, and it depends also from your audience. How do we make sense in more detail of the way we define the structure of our layout? Some of these sense making is not cerebral, like it's not basic on our neurology as the finding of the size and the edges, but it's more based on a convention, as Michela said before. For example, here in Western countries, for the depiction of linear processes, we are used to represent movement or a sequence from left to right. And this is often suitable for representing procedures such a pipeline, a methodological and methodical pipeline, or cellular events like cell division or embryo development or disease progression. For the way that we perceive information around us, most of the time, something that goes from bottom up, it's perceived as happy, it's perceived as good status, it's perceived as positive trend. On the other hand, what goes from top down, it's perceived as sad, it's perceived as negative, it's perceived as a slope, it's a negative slope, as perceived as sickness many times. So starting from the top left corner and moving diagonally, you can represent a negative slope. On the other hand, you can represent a positive slope with a diagonal starting from the bottom left corner. Again, giving something of somewhat of a dynamic aspect to your layout. Starting from, if you decide to start from the center, you can use you can build a cycle, for example, to represent cyclic processes. And remember, for the sake of readability, most of the time you do that clockwise, because it's the way we are used to perceive cycles, as for example, when you look at your at a clock or at your watch. Another thing that you can do, cycles as, for example, daily or annual or metabolic processes. Using center periphery, you can also create some kind of layout where there is one cause and many effect relationships, or a central information linked to more and more secondary details as our eyes move farther from the center. And we can also use symmetry and asymmetry principle to create something that goes from the topmost edge of your layout to smaller and smaller details, so that your eyes will be guided to see something that is splitted into more detailed information, starting from a title or a single big chunk of important information. On the other hand, you can also use some kind of brick wall layout, like laying information in this way, to represent a movement that goes bottom up, that your eyes can follow as the content stacks and create a sense of upward movement from bottom to top in some sort of conversion, while in this other example above here, you are diverging. I'll here show you some kind of example from my visualizations. For example, here you can see definitely linear layout where the eyes, I try to guide the eyes from the first speaker here to the other speakers, so that you can move from left to right easily with your eyes. And as I told you, here on the aligned to the left and to the top edge, there is the title and the information. The credit information and the the date of the event of which I created this visualization is on the corner here and here. Another example is this kind of visualization here. Keep in mind that these are created live. Most of the time they are created without having previous information. So the content is mapped as it comes out. And in this case, I chose to give this this bottom-up dynamic layout of using the wave, since here we were talking about marine environments, so that the information could fit inside the different parts of the visualization. Another example here is clearly a central image with a clockwise layout. This was used to as a visual guide and visual support for a kid laboratory about smoking and the hazard of the health hazard of smoking. And the content was going to be exposed and presented following a clockwise from this quadrant to this, and to this one, following a clockwise flow of information. And even simpler way of representing information is clearly dividing them in chunks. Here, this is much more illustrative and artistic visualization, since it was going to be a table mat printed for kids, where you show the different nutrients present in food, but they are clearly divided using color in different chunks, each one pertaining, using the title, to a specific category and class of nutrients. So these are some of the way in which you can use your space and layout to split and give meaning to information when you put that on your Canva. Let's move to the elements, to how to visualize on our layout. These are two examples of notes that I created in two different occasions. One is a live drawing of a conference. The other one is are notes from a lecture. What you see here differently from normal handwritten notes, there is basically the main difference that you can see are a conscious use of space not in a linear use of space from left to right, but at 360 degrees, where information gets mapped in every direction. The use of icons, sketches, and doodles. The fact that this is synthetic, there is short text. There are no long paragraphs, no big chunk of text. And the chunks that there are here are schematized, are connected with arrows and contained in boxes, or in any case, in any way, there are specific and explicit graphic elements that underlines their relationship. And there is also a hierarchy, which we'll see how it is built. You can see here bigger things as things that your attention need to focus on more, and using the use also of color and fonts to give a sense of more important, less important. And of course, as I said before, the use of color, the proper use of color to represent information. Let's focus, first of all, on the first way to represent our content, as I showed you before, which is the imagery, of course. We are talking about visual communication. So the first thing that keep in mind, once you have defined the general structure of your layout, you may use visualization and images to represent your content, your key content. This visualization can include photographs, computer-generated visualization, hand-drawn illustrations, schematic representations, moving from a spectrum that goes to more representational and concrete to more abstract here and symbolic. I would suggest you to, of course, depending on the context and the content of the research you are trying to visualize, you can choose among these formats. I would suggest you to use complex and detailed visualization only if strictly necessary. The richer visual representation is, the heavier is the cognitive load to our visual processing system. Our brain craves for simple, essential, synthetic images, since those are the ones from which it can extrapolate meaning in the easiest and fastest way. Many of you now would stuck to the thought, to the most common thought that people may have at this point. I can't draw. I remind you that you are, when using visual thinking, you are not required to do art. What you do is using visualization to create, to give a shape to your thoughts. You're not creating something artistic. You can start from the easiest sign that probably many of you does when talking at the phone, doodling, and build complex, more and more complex shapes. You can just put together elemental shapes to create simple images that you just need to give a little bit of detail to give a shape that you can give meaning to, and the eyes of the viewer can identify with something familiar. I wasn't Da Vinci here. I just created some small icons that you can use to visualize the content of the key content of what you want to communicate. I'll speed up a little bit here, and we'll go to the other part of our content, text. Keep in mind that using visualization and visual thinking doesn't mean you have to discard text altogether. In fact, complex scenarios are better understood and memorized when text and visual works together. Here also there is a gradient. You can go from, indicative text, where you basically are giving pure and simple information of what you are trying to represent or indicate with the text, to narrative, where you are trying to tell a bit more of context about what you are trying to present. And here we move to a text that you can use to substitute visual representation. Here I could have drawn a bacterium, but in fact I just wrote bacterium. Or a label to an image or to a visually represented object, or a description of a set of a visually represented object, which becomes basically a caption, or text by itself, which could be used to describe without clearly referencing to an image, but just using that chunk, representing that chunk of information as textual information. Keep in mind that these two are a continuum. Verbal and visual information are created from the same elements. So don't be afraid to use curves, dots, lines to create simple visual representation of your thoughts instead of words. Most of the time, these are more effective than using just words. Now I will briefly move, and then we can stop a bit before moving to the structure part. And for that, we move again to our pre-attentive features. Remember, things that our brain perceives immediately and gives, the brain gives sense to these features even before we are conscious of that. First of all, with these features, we can also highlight patterns, groupings, comparisons, and differences. How we can do that? Well, the first thing that I could do to represent similarity, to represent cohesiveness within patterns of groupings is, of course, similarity. Similarity in shape. Here, our brain perceives different shapes as similar shapes as grouped together in the same group of content or information. But you can use also color. Different group of colors, again, is interpreted as different categories of information, and different size, as, for example, smaller, which is interpreted with smaller size dots or shapes which are interpreted as similar or grouped together with respect to bigger information. As you can see here, color and size in this sense work better than similarity in shape for communicating groupings and patterns and similar pattern to our brain. Even better than similarity works proximity in space. Again, position wins over everything. If you put things together, they are perceived as similar or pertaining to a same group of category of information that the one which are afar from those. Even more effective than proximity is boxing and connection. Using a box to enclose information or a line to connect them, for example, an arrow, it's the most powerful way for our brain, most explicit way for our brain to perceive what is linked to what. In this sense, for example, you can use bullets of two different forms, bullet points of two different forms, to isolate information of two different types. For example, pros and cons. Or on the contrary, you can use one specific dot different from the other in shape of color or color to bring out immediately particularly noteworthy information compared to the others, so that your eyes and the eyes of the viewer knows that they require attention. Another example can be seen from the sequences, for the sequences of information. If you put information in a linear sequences so that your brain perceives the sequence or the order, if you just move one part of the sequence a little bit farther or down, up or down the sequence, this comes out immediately. Your brain interprets that thing out of the sequence as foreign, as weird, as something that does not belong to that sequence. At the same time, you can use this same feature to divide information. So you can use difference in size, as I said, in color and in shape, to differentiate specific chunk of information from others. You can use space between elements to separate what belongs to a group from another. And you can use, again, boxing and separation to, with explicit lines, to separate a group of information from others, and to divide them to separate, so isolate a specific group of information from the other. How does this translate in our visual design? This translates with feature for verbal structure, where you use, as you do on text, you use fonts, you use bigger and thicker fonts, for example, for main information, for important information, and you can go smaller and smaller for smaller and more secondary details. You can use also color to make something stand out as important, as to capture the attention of the viewer. At the same way, you can use visual structure, where you use bullet points, dividers, arrows, or boxes, again, to separate and to group together at the same time visual communication, so that they are perceived as linked or separated from other. Here, I make you a brief detailed explanation about arrows. Of course, arrows can depict motion and direction. You can show easily a process, or for example, a molecule passing through a membrane, or a change over time using arrows connecting two different images of the same of the same phenomena, or the same object, of the same entity you are trying to represent. Arrows can help you to depict sequence. And when chunks of information need to be in a specific order, they make you can make, with arrows and bullet points, the progression clear. For example, here, if you have points to make in progression, since they are subsequent in time or connect in a cause-effect process, you can line them up using position to imply order. You can use bullet points to explicit the sequence. And if you use number for those bullet points, you can even break and create a more dynamic design on your map. You can use, somewhat less effectively, as I told you in the beginning, progressively darker shades of the same color, moving to one shade to the next creates a subtle progression. And of course, finally, arrows helps you to create and highlight relationship. As in many examples of visual maps that you use in science visualization most of the time, as in phylogenetic trees, for examples, or in diagrams. And again, in this case, arrows, lines, and boxes are used to highlight relationships for example, in graphic organizers or diagrams. With all these principles, you can already powerfully apply visual thinking. Again, you don't need to be a designer. You can use this principle to quickly share your ideas, building essential and clear sketches while discussing with your peers or presenting your ideas, if you feel brave enough to do it, when you're presenting your idea, your data to an audience. This is basically what am I involved to in with my job. You can use this kind of technique in, I will briefly introduce you here, in more or less interactive way. You can just passively translate what is said by a speaker live, and this reinforces the learning of the audience. You can increase the engagement and participation whenever there is a discussion or with a group, and you can collect their, for example, your research team advices and ideas, live drawing and collecting their suggestion while you sketch the map of the thoughts and ideas that are coming out. Or you can co-create and draw in group what is the map of the collective thoughts of the picture that everyone has in mind, so that you can you can tune on the same mental image. Of course, this is out of the scope for our design presentation, but if you want to go straight and use this kind of application of visual thinking with sketches and doodles and visual representation of visual mapping of concepts, you may want to delve deeper into this. But now let's move to the design part, to the real creation, starting from these visualization principle, this toolbox of visual thinking, of visualization, of graphic design and creation of visual science communication. First of all, we need to introduce to design thinking. What is design thinking? It's a methodology, a set of practice, basically applied to problem solving, production of creative output, and any sort of product design. And this naturally applies also to the creation of a visualization product for science communication. Visual thinking does nothing else than making visible, tangible, invisible ideas, supporting and accelerating this design thinking. In our case, what we want to do is ideate and create visual communication to communicate our research and what we want to convey to our audience. And images, of course, offers us clarity and a shared understanding of the context, of the content, of the audience, and of the goals of your communication, and allows also to explore much more quickly different ideas and strategies that you can exploit to share your knowledge. We can briefly summarize the principle of design thinking as these. First of all, you spot the key content in your visualization, particularly within complex articles or complex research. You want to spend time narrowing down the key messages to what you want to deliver. Some simplification may be necessary to establish a clear focus. In this sense, it's true that more is not always the better. So keep the information, the key information, to the minimum. You focus on the user. First of all, you keep in mind who your visual communication is dedicated to. It is a scientist in the field. It is for researchers in different fields, or for non-specialists. Who is basically the target of this visualization? And of course, you define the goal. Once you have considered the final user its needs, what you want him to know or to do or to think, and the content that you want to deliver, what purpose does your visual science communication piece have? Dissemination, communication with other specialists, advancement report of your research project, engagement, which of the key content you want to stress to fulfill that purpose. Be ready also to be iterative, to sketch, to jot down your ideas, your visual ideas on paper, and to repeat and repeat and repeat until you find good rather than perfect ideas. You just need to try and try and try which are the visual solution that you would apply, better to that communication in terms of layout, in terms of content, in terms of way of using colors, etc. Grounded creativity is also important. Remember that the effectiveness of your visual representations is not arbitrary. It responds to the mechanism of our visual perception and the rules of information design. So think outside the box, but balance your creativity with the need for clarity and the need for synthesis. And finally, remember to test your visualization, to try to show them to someone, to have an opinion from them, to get feedback, and be ready to keep returning to your visualization and keep that improved until you get better and better results. We can divide these principles into three basic phases: a concept phase, a drafting phase, and of course a final one, the design phase. Let's see them one by one. The concept part, as we saw before, is what message do I want to convey, to whom, and to what purpose? First of all, let's think about, as Michela said before, one of the most important part, the audience. When designing visual communication, you need to understand to whom you are communicating, and especially you need to remember these two images here. Until recently, the image on the left was held as right. The image on the left is the deficit model of science communication. Basically, it said that the members of general public has to be provided with knowledge about scientific matters, and the more you do so, the more the interest and understanding of science would increase. But this is not true. Scientific discourse is not a unique entity, and the public is not a huge undifferentiated group. There are many groups. Together with you have to build the conversation around science. So in terms of visualization, this means, and of communication in general, popularizing science, if treated as on the left, it's a one-way linear communication, and you just need to translate the content or create a simplified description of scientific knowledge. In fact, for constructing visual communication properly, you need to be conscious that each social group has its own persuasive devices based on their values, life experiences, culture, sex, gender, age, and so on. The popularization of science, therefore, is not simplification or translation, but even more so importantly, in visualization, it means to recontextualize the scientific practice, the scientific content, and the scientific message. You won't just report scientific fact to a less specialized audience. You are also representing phenomena, data, and research in different ways to talk to different audiences for different purposes. How do you do this? Well, there are many ways you can think of segmenting your audience. For example, a very common way is by age, a practice that seems self-evident when you work with children, since it's obvious that an activity that gets a specific message for a 5-year-old, it's unlikely to engage a teenager. When you work, however, with adult audiences, there is a tendency to assume that a single initiative will work for everyone. Even though it's obviously that, for example, an activity or a visualization that it's designed for young adult males won't be very attractive for old female patients, for example. One of the most common tools, which I introduce you just for the sake of completeness, to segment, to think about your audience, it's the so-called empathy map. Maybe some of you know it. It's a tool, a visual tool that allows you to understand how your audience feel or think or do about something. It's an exercise that helps you to walk a little bit in the shoes of your potential target and experience what he or she sees around herself. What does she do in everyday life? What does she hear? It gives you a sense of what she or he may be interested in. What does he or she care about? This will help to tailor your message on your target audience. You basically use this Canva to fill this quadrant here, to feel writing or sketching. What does this person think or feel? What does he see, or what does he say or do? And what does he hear? After you think of your audience, remember that design choices can be subtle but important. As I said before with Michela, color is one of the most the most classical example. Statistically, for example, men like black, green, and purple. Black, blue, and green. Dislike purple, orange, and brown. While women, still statistically, like blue, green, and purple, and dislike orange, brown, and gray. This may look simple, but the context and the message you're trying to portray will always also matter when selecting colors. For example, most of the time, human-centered design can be represented with warm color, while technology or nature are more are generally more represented with colder color, like green or blue or gray. Of course, again, this is a cultural convention. You have to think who you are referring to. And also our layout and our structure are influenced by who we are talking to. A more formal structured composition, for example, can be good for academic communication between peers. You can show more freedom and a more dynamic and free layout when you're talking to a younger, non-specialized audience, for example. After the audience, or actually together with the audience, depending you are referring to, you need to think of the goal of your communication. Your piece of visual communication, of science visual communication, may be useful for spread and disseminate research to lay public, whatever part of the non-specialist audience this is, to engage and draw attention, to convince, to recommend, for example, to convince funding bodies to finance your project, or to advise policymakers when making a decision. You need also to, you may want also your visual communication to report advancement in your research project to patient or patients association. And of course, you may want your visualization to share ideas and foster discussion, for example, among peers and colleagues. And finally, for this concept phase, you may think to this glass retort here as a metaphor, maybe a familiar metaphor, for the process of distilling important and key information to select the relevant content that should fill your visualization. Remember, you're going to be synthetic. You don't need to put everything, all the content of your paper, of your knowledge, of the knowledge you have about that specific research topic on your visualization. It's important to communicate for your objective at best, because of course, you can't communicate everything. Before moving to the next step of the design process, you spend a good amount of brainstorming, keeping in mind that here is your goal that heatens up the content, the boiling content of your paper or of your research, and condense here the key concept that you want to communicate, coming out with an accurate and concise chunk of information that you can put on your visualization, either textually or visually. The main criteria that may guide you in this sense are: is this chunk of information related to the topic of my research? It connects to other chunks. It helps you think of new chunks of information. And all these questions here, down there, where this picture fit in the world, where this research fit in the world, what is the question that you are trying to answer, what are the key results and findings, what do these results or findings means, etc., are useful to guide you. Beware, always remember to be accurate and synthetic. That means isolating short and essential sentences to condense important chunks of information, and especially when unnecessary, when the public, when unnecessary or when even detrimental, avoid jargon. Use as simple language as you can for communicating with non-specialist audience. That was as much for the context, for the concept part. After you have spot the audience, the message that you wanted to communicate, and the goal for what you are communicating, the message, you move to the sketching and the visualization of that idea. But I will tell you, now we can have a break if you want, since we have speeded up a little bit. After the break, you will put your hand, pen on paper, and we'll try to draft yourself what you will see what.
Okay, so Jacopo, you're suggesting to have 10 minutes break?
Yeah.
And then we are back and you tell us what to do?
Yeah, and we're back and I will give you the instruction.
Okay. And will we need to divide in groups?
Yes. For the next section, you are going to divide into the groups that you will be that you have been assigned to for the different case studies. And basically you will need, following some instruction that I will give you, you will try with no pressure, no judgment about your experiment, because it is so. You will try to draft the main messages of your research,
okay.
of the research that you have been assigned.
Okay, so that's going to be 6 groups and
yeah.
6 and 3 case studies,
yeah.
which have been already discussed. Okay, so I think we can be back at 3:37.
Yeah.
In 10 minutes, and yeah, with lots of energy to try ourselves. Okay, thank you. See you in a second, or in 10 minutes, in fact.
Yeah.
So basically, in group A, only 2 persons are left because some people had to leave. And that's also in group D, only 1 is left. So shall we put together group A and D in order for them to work together?
Yes, we can do
even
that.
If they, I can't remember if they have different tasks. So, you know, they will decide whose research to talk about.
Yeah, you can. They will probably have a little bit. They will probably need a little bit more to get together on the same big picture to align, but it will be okay for that.
Yeah.
Again, it's an experiment, so
exactly.
It's something aimed to put to be familiar again, or train, if you are familiar already, your visual thinking skills when visualizing science content. Great, Virginia.
So Virginia, Chiara, do you accept Simone De Tassis in your group? And Simone, are you happy to go to talk with them? Rather than being alone.
Of course.
And I saw, Ines, you were saying you have to leave at 4, and that's okay, no problem. There are 3 persons left in the group C. So even if you leave, you are not, you know, destroying completely a group, because there are some people left. So I think it's fine. Yeah. So I think the Trama,
start.
Yeah, the organization.
Yes, we got it. We will do it that way, okay?
Thank you. So I think now, before we divide in groups, Jacopo tells us something, and then we are divided. Okay.
I will give you a little bit of instruction. So now it's up to you. It's up to put onto the test what I've tried to to give you as information about visualization and visual thinking so far. Again, it's an experiment. So think about this process. Like we saw the paper, the research thread, the case study, or the papers that you want to share as the content. Then you think about the audience and the goal, in function of which you decide which key concept you capture in your visual and how you visualize that content. After that, you step to the you pass to the next step, which is the drafting phase. You choose, as we saw before, an appropriate layout. You translate key concepts in simple graphics, and you map out the text and imagery with arrows or tables or box on your layout. Okay. What I'm asking you to try now is take 10 minutes basically to discuss. If you need a bit more, of course, take a little bit more, to discuss your case study, the case study you have been assigned. Spot the key content depending on the audience that you want to talk to. It may be a patient association, or it may be a founding group. You may decide that. You discuss together how to visualize it, and I will suggest you to make the process easier since we are online. Either to charge one person to draw the suggestion of all the others, but if some of the other people in the group wants to draw himself and show his own ideas, so to share them visually with the person who is drawing, he can do that. He feels free. If he or she frees, so he feels so, he is free to do that, and actually is encouraged. After we're finished in 25-30 minutes, we can show each other in the main room what come out of this experiment and how we visualized our case study. So if everything is clear.
The only question I might have is, so you suggest everything is done on paper and with a pen, and then we either show it to the cameras or we take a picture and use it in the screen share, right?
Exactly, because since we are in the drafting phase, drafting is always done with pen and paper, definitely, because as I show you here, you have to be ready when you do a draft to discard your draft and repeat. The drafting process, in the drafting process, the process itself, it's central, not the final product. You are working with your ideas to visualize them. Do not hesitate to throw away and iterate until you have the subtle visual, a suitable visual solution. I'll show you. You don't have to be artistic. You just need to put your ideas and schematize them visually. You're not making a piece of art. You are giving shape to your ideas on paper about how to communicate the case study you have been assigned. You see that the one here on the right is mine. It's a draft I made for the realization of a graphical abstract for a researcher in the University of Padua. You see, there is nothing artistic here. It's just a schematization with visuals and icons of the general idea of the paper. So if you want to try and keep and capture the key content and visualize them and put them in a frame that can be understandable and easy to communicate, let's start.
Okay, and I think the organization is going to divide us in groups now, and we will jump through the different groups and have a look. So
good work to everybody.
Most of them are already went.
Okay.
Apart from, I see still Beatrice. And
I see Michela, Milena, and the
organization.
Okay. I will move from
okay,
one.
now you are in groups, so you can move to the different groups. Remember to at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see the button to do switch between the groups.
Yeah.
Well, the button to open the group list, and at the right of each group, you will see the button to join for each group.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Like a hotel ring bell, like ding, 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 ding.
You cannot just give us, you have 13 seconds.
Sorry? You want 30 seconds more?
Yeah, there, suddenly 13 seconds. It's too much.
It was an abrupt countdown.
Yes, we need something to tell us. You have 2 minutes, for example.
Yeah, I know, but I know that everybody could go on forever.
Yeah, I would have talked. I would have make you do a lot of exercises more today, so that we could have like 5 hours. But that we have a little bit. We are running running short of time. So, okay, how did it feel?
It was fun.
Okay, it's already a good answer, since for many it can be distressful, because they are not used since they were kids to draw.
It was also stressful.
But you know, it's a first step to get again in touch with your visual thinking skills, and why not, as many people in my field says, with your, in this sense, with your inner child, with the possibility of expressing yourself visually without thinking of the judgment of the result. You're just expressing your ideas visually so that you can share them with others.
Can I also add that you are the brave who are left, because it's only 16 of you left out of the 28 participants. So you were not running away, and
they weren't scared.
You know, I mean, I'm really a bit, how can I say, disappointed by the rest of the people who left. Anyway, I understand that they had other things to do, but I think it's nice that you are left.
Okay, in a couple of minutes, if one of the people of the group, if the one who drew or whoever, wants to show and see, and let us see how the visualization went, so that then we can move to the conclusion, to the last part.
So we start with group A, but I didn't draw, so that's why I'm volunteering my colleague to do the talking.
That's fine. I mean, it's an ugly
masterpiece. Don't think don't think to the product. You have to focus on the process.
So this is our little thing.
Can you tell me about it a little bit?
Yes, of course. So we choose to do like a long kind of banner, right?
Okay.
Divided in column.
Nice.
So we have, first thing, we have our problem, which is better represented here. So basically it's like the Alzheimer syndrome plus time. So we draw equal Alzheimer, right? Then here we put what we've done. So actually not what we've done, our idea. So this is like our new drug repositioning, right? Here it's what we did, so high throughput screening of this drug. So kind of our result. Here it's what we want to do, and it's about model test.
Yeah, they are.
So we draw.
Those are supposed to be mice.
Yes.
You know.
It's as soon as you can recognize them, they're okay. You don't need to be perfect.
And then this is like analyzing them, right?
Okay.
And this is what we miss. So clinical tests on people and more. And we want to know about, from our fellow scientists if they are keen to work with us.
Okay, it's a clear scheme and clear visualization. So good job. That's you wouldn't. No one would expect nothing more. It's okay. It's perfect. Any other?
I think I can go next.
Okay.
We also have Down syndrome.
Okay.
My drawings weren't as good as the other people in the lab, but I think I did more drawings, so it's...
You just used a different layout. They usually a linear layout from left to right. You created a layout from the center.
From center to, because our target audience were students.
Yeah.
And we wanted just to share our knowledge of the disease and the current treatments. So we start here in the upper corner.
Okay.
And about the trisomy of the disease with the extra chromosome. the features or the hallmarks of the disease, with the facial characteristics, with the heart and brain deficits and perinatal outcome.
Okay.
There is 1 in 700 incidents.
Nice way to represent quantity. You just visualize easily with this kind of diagrams. Yeah.
And that currently they are now reaching older
60s.
age, 60s, and then they have started to develop some Alzheimer's-like disease. So there is a new hope that current treatments or novel therapies for Alzheimer's could be repurposed into the these patients.
That was clear and concise. Thank you. Another group. We are 2 out of 5, right?
Okay, so for group B, we did it on PowerPoint so that we could.
Oh,
wow!
It's just so that but in the end, we haven't advanced as much as the other because it's quicker to draw than to PowerPoints anyway. So I'll share my screen.
You should always do your draft actually pen and paper.
Yes,
that's something that you remember.
So we started, but the other people couldn't see what I was drawing, and
in this sense, given the online environment, it's easier to do.
I had the same problem. I had to take out my virtual background for this.
So the idea, can you see the slide?
Yeah.
So the idea was to try to draw a patient. So for us, it's the Machado-Joseph disease. And we decided that the message was the recruitment of patients for the clinical trial. So we wanted to tell them that there's a new treatment with antisense oligonucleotide and try to draw it.
Remember not to use acronyms or always use simple just write it by extent, antisense.
And so the treatment would be an injection in the spine of either the drug or placebo.
Okay.
You have to understand that it's a placebo control. And the treatment will be every 8 weeks for 4 injections.
Yeah.
And then the analysis, and here we would have said, come to the hospital for the test X and test Y.
Okay.
And probably finally something like, we need you for the clinical trial. And,
But the final call of action, you can put it or not. It depends on the setting where this communication will be used. Like if it's in a hospital, probably that would be okay. In a presentation or a speech, it could be okay also to have a final call to action. In other cases, you may omit it, so it's okay. Third group. No, fourth. Sorry, not third. We are at the fourth group.
So maybe we can go in because we're group C. We have the same disease.
Okay.
So this is our little draw. And we started from the story we designed yesterday. So the guy here, his name is John, and he's a bus driver.
Okay.
One day he had a leg injury because he had some symptoms that he couldn't explain. So for example, double vision. So this should be an apple and he sees 2 apples, and also tremor. And doctors couldn't figure it out why he had such a symptom. So he went to a geneticist. Maybe I should tell that this is, the target is other patients.
Yeah, okay.
And then the geneticist diagnosed him for this terrible disease where this gene, a TXNG3 gene, has many CAG repetition, many. And this leads to misfolded protein. Protein that doesn't work. So after this diagnosis, he's really sad and depressed. And to find the energy to go on, he goes to meetings where, so he finds this meeting where other patients with the same genetic disorder meet and talk about and share their story of their life. And through these meetings and also through the doctor, he knows about the clinical trial. And then he's happy because there is a hope. And stop.
Okay, one advice. when you are tracing a storyline or a story, a visual storytelling, as in this case, when there is no circular process, like one cycle that repeats after the other, it's better if you draw that linearly. It's in a linear storytelling that goes, don't use cycle if there isn't anything specifically cycling, like coming back to the beginning and repeating again. Just let it go with the flow and just with the beginning and the end of the story. Of course, I understood that here you wanted to represent that he comes back to drive the bus, but in as you represented here, you were basically showing that after he goes back to drive the bus, he feels bad again, and he goes to that's the general point. But anyway, you did a good job in the visual storytelling of every step.
Thank you.
And we are done.
The last
one, okay.
We have two different schemes. The first one is from left to right, and this is this one. Now that is possible to see. We want to discover a gene therapy to cure the disorder ACLN7 by using AAV vectors. Then the first steps to injected in cells to increase the production of these vectors, and then to do the intrathecal injection with the vectors, and also control in the patients. And in these disorders, the patient is children. The idea then is to measure the rescue of our treatment, so that the conclusion saved the life of our children. But to do this, we need a lot of money. Then please give money.
maybe a little bit less explicit would be okay, but no, but you did a good job also in I saw you talked and aligned with visuals a lot with Beatrice, so you exchange your ideas just with drawings, which is something that is really is even more useful, of course, if you are in both of you you meet in real life. Online it's harder, but if you can discuss around a single image, your ideas moves much faster, and you can align on the same page much quicker. Okay, every one of you did a really good job in realigning again with his or her.
Jacopo, sorry, I think Chiara needs to say something about, I think she wanted to ask something.
Yes, since I'm doing the screenshots for the Facebook page, if the group with the bus driver can show again the draw.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, can you put that on Twitter as well?
Yes, of course.
I cannot share if somebody else is sharing.
I stopped sharing. Okay.
Is it okay?
Perfect. Yes. Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing your things and letting us put that on the socials. I think it's a nice way.
They just realized.
Okay. You, as I said, you all did a good job. Again, it was an experiment to get again in touch with your visual thinking abilities and to discuss using drawings and to align on the same big picture with putting your ideas pen on paper. Briefly, quite briefly at the moment, in fact, I will move after you make your draft to the last part of your design process, which is the design itself. You can use the principle that I have shown you briefly in this 2.5 hours, more or less, for all the kind of visualization that you may want to create. These are transversal skills that applies to every kind of visualization, from presentation slides to graphical abstract to academic poster to visual resources for social media, for infographic, for the creation of infographics and data visualization, and also for the live scribing that I do while drawing live, synthesizing conferences and the speeches and the discussions. 4 general principles that you may want to know for a minimal guide of good graphic designing for non-designers. First of all, cut. Don't use minimal margins all around your design. Don't use way too long text columns, insufficient spacing between lines or text or between text and images, overly decorative fonts, too much text. These are common mistakes that people who are non-designers do. You don't cram as much content as possible in your visual output. Just cut and make it essential. Once you have cut the content, you chunk it. You basically distill the chunks, the pieces of useful information from, you make them easily distinguishable and clearly discernible. You use boxes, you use clear section in the background, you use clear headings and subheadings, you make the flow of information explicit. You remember to align, don't place all the elements randomly. Our eyes constantly looks for patterns. Don't use a random placement of elements in the design. This is a major handicap in the communication effectiveness. Aligning of the elements can immediately improve the effectiveness of your visualization. And finally, also restrain the tendency of the willing to be artistic, the willing to use fancy fonts of a lot of colors. Executing restraints will greatly enhance your creation. And you can see here a more example of how a bad academic poster is made. And for example, this is already somewhat better because there is a better use of space. There is not too much text. The visuals are relevant and useful. But with a little bit of design twisting here, you can make it even better. You can chunk text even more. You can use, remember that posters are, first of all, networking tools, since a big visible image of your of the context of the content that you're explaining is something that can be spotted from afar. So it's useful to gather attention from people who wants to see the content of your poster. Of course, no one would expect you to start doing really cool posters like these ones, but again, you can use them as examples of how to properly use design and visualization to create visual science communication that works. Another example are graphical abstract that you can use to even more synthetically communicate your research. And depending on your audience, you can create graphical abstract with our more for like the first one on the top left here, which are more for scientists, or this one also who even has the p-value and other data which are readable for other specialists. But you can also use more cartoonish style or infographic style, which are more layman or lay people friendly in the exposition of content. Same goes with the slide presentation. You on the left here see a wall of text with no image and no referring, apart from the bigger size of the font here as a distinction for the header. On the left here, you see something really much more design-wise with a really useful image to show, few text to few phrases, and a title that catches the eyes on a white background. Remember, most of the time, creativity is in and usefulness of visualization is in essentiality of the visualization. A little bit of indication for you if you want to try to experiment with visualization with softwares. Of course, as one of you did, you can already have a good resource in Microsoft PowerPoint. But of course, if you have access to graphic design software like Adobe Illustrator or Adobe Photoshop, feel free to use them. They have a little bit, since they are professional, they have a quite a learning curve, hard learning curve. So you can start with something easier like Canva. I don't know how many of you knows it, which is an online free software for graphic design, really useful and user-friendly. Or also MindGraph, which is a similar resource. It's not free actually, but it's really useful and made exactly for scientists. So it's really useful in this sense. I will skip this part, so because basically I would give you the slide after. Remember to be consistent with images. Don't use images that looks like taken from different sources. If possible, use images with the same style and the same coherent visual aspect, so that your design gets looks more professional in this sense. One last reminder about color. Most of the time, for what you use color. You use color to highlight, to evidentiate, to contrast, to make something more visible on your visual abstract. To encode data and information, as we saw before, you use different color for different categories. You use diverging, like bright green or bright red, and shades in the middle to show diverging data, and also more and more intense or less intense shades of a color to show order and quantity. And you also use them, of course, to show the appearance and the color of a visualized object. In all these cases, remember, you, out of the color wheel on your graphical abstract, you will need just 4 to 5 color, nothing more. Don't use a lot of color on your visual abstract or your poster or your graphic design to make it more fanciful. Most of the time, you just scorch retina with that. Just decide, again, as we saw before, depending on the audience and the topic, which is your dominant hue, your dominant color that you want to use for your visualization, an analogous hue that helps you to visualize different categories in harmonious way with the dominant hues you choose, and the complementary hue, like the one that is on the opposite side on the color wheel, like here the cyan against the red, to make strong and immediate contrast to spot like key concept or keywords, and to make them stand out a lot. So remember to use dark shades or black for text against a white or very clear background, so that the text is really legible. A dark shade of an analogous color that of the main color you chose for imagery, and a lighter shade for structural elements like bullets, arrows, boxes, so that they don't come out too strongly and don't make your design look too overcrowded with stuff, with graphical elements. Basically, what I want you to communicate to finish is, in this sense, you can create a compelling and beautiful visualization just with few colors used correctly. In a simple phrase to close, use color a lot, don't use a lot of colors. And that was everything for today. I sped up a little bit for the last part, but I will send Michela this presentation so that you can have it.
Can I add something, Jacopo? Sorry, just
yeah.
because of this inclusiveness issue I always have. I'm putting in the chat. There are several websites where you can simulate how your colored slides are seen by different color blind people, so having different color blindnesses.
That's really useful, yeah.
And
especially when you create red or green design, since these are the most common forms of color blindness. So it's really useful in this.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, definitely.
Just a minute. I want to ask that in the presentations, when we are giving a presentation, you did it a few times. Is it good to make it in the one slide, for example, show a one image and then the other and then the other, or show all of the same at the same time? Does it make any difference between them?
Remember, the slides, as any other thing you use to as a support to talk on, it's, as the word says, a support. They have to follow your train of thoughts or your narration of your speech. If you are presenting the three images together so that you are talking about them at the same time, you show them at the same time. If you show them consequently, if you speak about them consequently, one after the other, like in a process, or to show in a more dynamic way the content that you are talking about, you use them one after the other. It's a way to match as much as possible the content that you are expressing verbally, basically.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. If you have any other question?
I think nobody has.
Okay.
Questions? Thank you, Jacopo. It was
Sorry, I do have one little question. This mind the graph that you recommended, is that any similar to BioRender?
Oh, BioRender, if I remember correctly, is more focused on icons, on simple images and representation. Mind the Graphs offers you whole templates, like, of course, with it's a paid online software, but you can access to already pre-made presets of templates for infographics, slides. So it's really useful as a base to start. It's basically a sort of Canva, but for scientists, with scientific content, especially for biologists and molecular biologists. So you may find it useful.
I just Googled it and it looked very, very similar, because there are, I mean, we've been using it quite a lot recently, and it's
You mean
quite
BioRender?
useful. Yes.
Okay.
It's quite useful, but it's true that that I start to see that everything starts to look the same because we're all using it. And they also do have this kind of pre-made cell that you can just change, or you can just draw. They have like brushes for DNA or membranes and things like that.
Okay. Thank you.
So I think it looks very, very
I missed
similar.
this information. Thank you.
But it would be nice to have a combination of several of those softwares. So we don't all draw the same things with the same icons and the same everything.
If especially for presentation, if you are not particularly in need of a lot of specific scientific icons in a very specific field or a very specific topic, I would suggest you to use Canva. It's really useful. It's really made with beautiful designs. So
well, I'll give it a go, because BioRender is good, but it's expensive. It's around 36
I don't know exactly
euros.
how much.
BioRender was around 36 euros per month, but you can just do a month and then switch off.
Okay.
Which is what I don't know, I do. I don't know if everybody else does the same, but I pay when I need it, and then I stop paying and then I pay again, and then I stop paying.
Okay. So thank you very much. It was really interesting. And so you said that you're going to give the presentation.
I will send you the slides, definitely.
You can give them to Trama and they will let us know, have these files. And yeah, see you again in the future. Thank you very much.
I hope so. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice rest of the Data Training School.
Thank you. Thank you. And see everybody who is still here tomorrow at 9:30.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Tomorrow.
Bye.